Hey guys, it's Micah here from the CCL Network, and this video exists for one purpose, and that is to convince you to stop saying discipleship. Stop saying discipleship. This word should be removed from our vocabulary. I'm going to convince you why if you'll watch this whole video. And I say this as somebody who has twice been a minister of discipleship. But I am convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that no one knows what you mean when you say discipleship. Or they think they know. This is the danger. They think they know, and you think you know what you mean. But nobody agrees on what they're talking about when they talk about discipleship. It's actually three different things. The first, and this is going to be, if you come from a school of thought, like if you read a lot of Tony Morgan or do intentional churches or stuff like that, when those guys talk about you need to have a discipleship pathway, and they're 100% correct, but when they say you need to have a discipleship pathway, what they really mean is your church needs an engagement pathway. The number one thing I think that people mean when they say discipleship in that kind of a setting is they mean engagement. They mean attend, serve, group, forgot my bullet point there, group, give, go to the new member class. All of this is built around the idea that what people need is they need to engage with their local church, which is correct. I agree with that. Churches, if you don't have a plan to help people engage at your church, you're in trouble. All of these things are trying to answer the same question, and that is, how do we connect to the church? That's an important question, and your church needs to have an answer to it. But a different thing that people mean when they say discipleship, and this, if you're reading, Dallas Willard, James Smith, Ruth Haley Barton, you're thinking about discipleship in terms of what I would call formation. How are we formed to be more like Christ? More and more the term spiritual formation is being used. I actually don't use that very much because for a lot of people that has kind of like new agey connotations, which I don't think it necessarily does. But I usually will talk about Christian formation or just formation. We are being formed in Christ. How do we grow in holiness, right? How do we grow and reach maturity in Christ? And so the key question here is, how do we grow? And your church is going to have answers for that and things that you do. And so, classically, the classic answer to this was Sunday school. It's like, oh no, we don't do Sunday school anymore. We do small groups, life groups, community groups, ... We do Bible study, men's and women's Bible study. Like, how can you be growing in Christ if you're not on a Beth Moore, Priscilla Schreier or something Bible study? And those things are good. None of those things are bad. And in fact, now it's like, oh no, now we need to be more into spiritual, you see more and more people into spiritual direction. D-I-R-E. There we go. Sometimes I can't write. Spiritual direction. Let's see if I can get there. And just really focusing on the spiritual disciplines, right? We're reading our Foster. We're reading our what's the lady's name? Lynn, whatever her name is. And these are all good things. Your church does need to have a plan for how do we grow, right? The third thing that people are talking about when they're talking about discipleship is what I would call disciple making. And the key question here is, how do we reproduce? How do we get new baby Christians, right? And so this is kind of an intentional reproduction here. And so this could be anything that's like, you'll hear the phrase heart to heart or life to life. This could be any kind of an intentional mentoring program or sponsoring program. Actually, ironically, one of the organizations that's best for this is like Celebrate Recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous, stuff like that. Maybe if you're around people that are talking about DMMs, right, disciple making movements, when they talk about discipleship, they're talking about this. They're not talking about these two things, right? You could put all kinds of things here. Hypothetically, at least, Discovery Bible Study is living in this space. Wants to live in this space. Now, here's the problem. First of all of these things are good. Don't hear me for a moment saying that one of these things your church does not need, right? Or you don't need as a Christian. You need to be engaged with your local church. You need to be formed to be more like Christ. You need to be making new disciples. Actually, ironically, if you're if you're of a Brenian persuasion, you'll notice there's a nice like up in out triangle here. But the problem is that mostly when people are talking about this, they're only talking about one. So broadly speaking, if your senior minister or your elders are talking about discipleship, especially senior minister, they're probably thinking in terms of this, right? How do we help people engage at the church? We have a discipleship problem. What do you mean by that? Not enough people are getting connected, or back door's too big. Okay, that's engagement. That's fine. Discipleship, right? You could put all this stuff. When people in the church are thinking about discipleship, usually they're thinking formation. This is my experience, at least. They're like, man, I don't feel like I'm growing. I'm stuck. I'm not moving forward. When I talk to people who are discipleship ministers, they're often thinking in terms of disciple making. But you can see really clearly how this is going to cause problems if someone says to you, hey, I need a discipleship plan for our church, and they're thinking engagement plan, and you're thinking disciple making plan, or if they're thinking formation and you're thinking engagement, right? These two things, one of the great problems in our churches, I'm convinced, is that we have thought that these two things are the same, that if we just engage people in all of our activities, that they will then be stronger Christians, and they'll be more fully formed in holiness and love of God and sacrifice and stuff like that. And that just doesn't happen. There's tons of research, most notably the Move book by Callie Parkinson, but tons of research that says this does not necessarily lead to this, and neither of these things necessarily leads to this. And that's okay. They have different purposes and different reasons for being. I'm not against any of them, but you need to know that they're not the same thing. I talked to a guy, and he said, our church's goal is to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And I was like, man, that's awesome. What are you doing to do that? And he says, well, we get everybody to attend and serve and group and give. And I was like, oh, well, that's good. I'm for that. Go back to the part, though, where you're making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. What's your plan for that? He said, I just told you, we get everybody to attend and serve and group and give. I went, oh, okay, I got it. And I'm not going to fight with him, but like, he's trying to solve this question. How do we get people engaged at our church? That's a different thing than how do we form them in Jesus. That's a different thing than how do we release them to go and make disciples, who make disciples who make disciples. So all three of these things are valid. Your church needs a plan for all three. I'm not against any of them. I just wish we wouldn't use the same word for all three, because it's confusing to talk to people. You're a discipleship minister. What is your job exactly? It's some of this. Who knows, right? You need a plan for engagement. You need a plan for formation. You need a plan for disciple making. I've personally got something I really like that kind of hits the sweet spot of all these things, but I'm going to talk about it in a different video. See you guys next time. Bye.